welcome to the Imelda MarCAST. Today we're talking to Kevin and Rick of the band White Suns. They have two releases coming out in January. The first one is an LP called The Lower Way, and the second one is a tape of unreleased live and studio tracks spanning the last 15 years called Modern Preserves. Rick, can you hear us?
What area is this that we're talking about?
Chicago. So I'm currently in Chicago and I grew up in this area and I love hating on it.
Nice. We love hating on where we grew up too.
Rick, you got snow?
Not really. Very little amount. What's that?
That's kind of weird.
Yeah, it's been a weird year. We don't really have much snow in town anyway. There's a ton in the mountains. We got
tell Dave about where you live.
I live in Southwest Montana.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
I've never been, but I hear it's gorgeous. I've only seen pictures and it looks like, as they would say, God's country.
Yeah. It is. I mean, it is very gorgeous here. If I look this way, I'm looking at this really insane, craggy, mountainous view. And
let's see, man, spin it.
I have to go outside. I'm not wearing shoes.
At least you're wearing pants.
Yeah, I'm not gonna. I'll let you. You can come here if you want to see it, and I'll show you.
We'll have to use our imagination. Yeah.
Yeah.
I imagine last year for you guys was busy preparing these two recordings.
Yeah, we the thing about our band now is that we live in 3 different cities. We live in 3 different places. So the lead up time to any kind of live activity or release is just longer and more complicated. So it did take us a little while to get the LP of new recordings. It took us a while to get it together. We actually recorded it. Did we record it in 2019, Rick?
I was gonna say it was 2 years ago this January.
Oh shit, yeah, yep.
So at that time, are you guys still living in the same place or?
No, we've had a long and complicated.
So when you guys write, will you send each other files or do you wait to get in the same place?
We always wait to get in the same place, aside from one thing that we recorded this past winter where we kind of shared files. And that was the first time we ever did anything like that.
Yeah, that was just due to the pandemic, really.
Yeah.
But usually before we get together to either prepare for a little tour or a show or a recording session, the most that we'll do is just get on a phone call together and talk about some ideas we might have of, some kind of compositional ideas or some whatever kind of stuff that's been floating around in our minds.
So I've been a fan for a few years now, but I really don't know the history of the band. How did you guys first meet?
We all went to high school together.
Yeah, we grew up in kind of a rural area in Connecticut.
So in high school, were you basically the 3 guys who were into weirdo music and no one else got it? Or did you guys go to a cool high school?
We had a group of friends who were all kind of more affected by music and art than the average person. But over the years, I didn't play in that many other bands with people in our area growing up. Actually, I guess I did, but Rick did also.
Yeah, I feel like we had a good group there was a fair amount of people that were into weird and noise or getting into it, kind of feeling their way through that world. And yeah. I feel like I played with a lot of different people, more so than you, but we kind of landed with each other.
Yeah, it was kind of over the years, as each year some people would drop off or stay in their comfort zone when it came to what kind of music they wanted to play. And over the years, me and Rick and Dana just kind of stayed connected because we kept wanting to do stuff that was weirder. We kept exploring different kinds of music, and at the end of the day, the 3 of us also played really well together. We liked improvising. I think that was the part that kind of really solidified us together, is that we were comfortable improvising with each other, not necessarily at every live performance, but we were comfortable jamming in a way that some of our other friends when we were younger weren't. People would want to write a more traditional song. Like someone would want to be like a singer-songwriter, type of setup for a band, and the three of us were not really interested in that kind of format.
Yeah, I think it's always been pretty explorative for the three of us.
So like early on, what bands and artists were you guys bonding over?
I guess, well, one thing that was big for me and Dana was we were going to the annual noise festivals that used to happen in New York that were organized by Carlos Cafoni, called No Fun Fest. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No, I don't think so.
But that was a thing that would happen once a year in New York. I think they probably did 5 or 6 years. And this was in like the early 2000s, like 2003, 2004, 2005. And me and Dana started going to those. We knew a little bit about, the kind of very marginal, international, and super local figures who were doing really strange music. But when we went into those festivals, you have 15 acts that are all different, but at the same time, none of them are following like any or very few traditional music rules, music theory and stuff. And that was really, really exciting to see, like Hair Police and Fat Worm of Error and some other bands from that, Wolf Eyes, Prurient, all the kind of big names from noise in the early 2000s came through there. And they would also get like some international people too, like Merzbow and some Japanese noise artists as well. So once me and Dana started going to those, we realized that, while we liked this music, it was hard to imagine an audience for it. But once you go to that and there's a couple hundred other people all freaking out and, throwing beer on each other and just having the best time for like 2 days, that was a really cool experience. And that made us feel a little more comfortable making this kind of music.
So like when you guys write, is improvisation like a core tenet of the compositional process for you guys?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I think whenever we get together, it's usually after a period of not playing or being around each other. And the first thing we do is just start improvising, and then sort of like a warm-up activity. And then out of that is where ideas or things start to stick for songs. And so we kind of extrapolate something from the improv and then work off of that. And everybody adds their ideas about what would make it a song, at least in recent years, I would say.
Yeah. I was just going to say, when you guys start improvising, are there any guidelines set forth? Or you just like hit the on switch and go?
I mean, sometimes we'll discuss a little bit, sometimes we'll be like, well, we haven't made a piece in a while that is kind of more sparse and slow, so let's try something like that. Just kind of very general guidelines like that is the most that we'll ever really put into place before we switch on.
So like across the White Suns discography, are you guys concerned with like trying to do something different with each release, or is it fine with, this is something we're happy with, so we'll put it out? Like, is there like a natural progression? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't think when it comes to compiling music for a release, we don't really think about our work in terms of like a release being a signified unit of songs that have a cohesive idea. Mm-hmm. We more work like song to song, where it's like, let's try something that we haven't done before on this song. And the next one that we make, we were talking about this a few days ago. If something sounds like, if there's a part of a song that sounds familiar from something we've done in the past, we'll immediately cut that, we try to just make stuff fresh, just for the three of us each time.
Yeah, and the releases they're agglomerations of whatever is happening at that particular time for us. We never think about like, this is what an album is gonna sound like.
Right.
From beginning to end.
I'm killing the flow. I have to look to my notes for a little bit.
It's okay.
All right. And I won't edit out me being a dickhead who's just like, oh, let me look at my notes. Sorry, guys.
Oh, maybe I should have notes too. Shit.
So like from the beginning of White Suns, you guys have been interested in not just like the traditional rock instrumentation like guitar and drums, but like also electronics and harsh noise, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, for me, I'm more of a guitar guy, but Rick and Dana were much more focused on that electronic based stuff.
So like over the years, the technology for generating weird sounds has changed. Like in particular, I'm talking about like Eurorack modular, and I saw a picture on your Facebook where at least one of you guys has like a modest modular setup. So like, how do you guys accommodate and keep up with like changing technology and how you guys can incorporate that into the harsh noise shit?
And I would say that Dana has kept up with that in particular. He has the modular setup, but for myself, I mean, I still like to circuit bend things and use tape, manipulation and kind of analog outdated technology. So I'm not really keeping up with it, so to speak, just staying the course, which is how Dana and I at least like used to spend hours and hours and hours like digging through thrift stores for old toys and just crap, basically. My approach has not changed in the gear that I use. I mean, I still play the same guitar with a lot of the same pedals that I've had since I was 17 years old now.
Yeah, I think one thing that has influenced the kind of gear we use, because me and Dana there was a phase of White Suns where Dana and I were just using electronics and there were no drums or guitars. The record Psychic Drift is all straight electronics. But what influenced that was more just circumstance than any kind of, plan. It was really just the fact that was a period where that was actually the first record that we did where the three of us weren't living in the same area. So, and none of us had cars at that point. It was just like, how can we pare down our shit and still make music that we like? And that was what influenced, the changes in the gear that we're carrying in our little boxes when we go to shows and practice and stuff.
That must be so appealing to be able to do like a live set with the stripped down gear list, and you don't have to load in and load out drums and set up like amps and all that shit, which is like the worst part of touring.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has its pros in that sense. It has its pros and cons. I don't think any of us were ever like, we didn't complain too much about loading in or out gear. It was more like sometimes the electronics are more easy to break. That's one problem.
Yeah. However, when we toured, close to 10 years ago now, it was completely out of the question to use a backline, anybody else's amps, anybody else's drums. Like we carried so much shit around.
Yeah, and that was, one of the reasons that we did that. One was that a lot of the stuff is customized, but the other reason was that you, as a touring band, you always have like the worst experiences. Anyone who's gone on tour knows this. You show up to a venue, maybe you've told them you need to borrow an amp. Maybe you've told them that, something broke 2 days ago, so you need to use a kick drum or something. And they just come up with the worst shit, or, they don't have it. It's just, by bringing all your own gear, it's another way to control your environment, I guess. That's something that I've thought more about over the years. I don't think we ever had any of these horrendous mishaps on tour that you hear about sometimes, because we would usually try to control our variables as much as possible so we didn't get fucked, 1,000 miles away from home and have to go to fucking Guitar Center in the middle of nowhere, which we've still done that.
Yeah.
Many times. And the horrendous mishaps would usually be, there's only a couple that I can think of, but they're on our end.
Yeah.
So given like the improvisational nature of the material, like when you guys play live, which maybe will happen in, I don't know, whenever the hell that would happen, but how interested are you guys in recreating the recording? Like, does that matter to you guys?
I guess, well, one thing that may flip your question is that we usually, by the time we're recording a piece of music, we're usually kind of over it.
Yeah.
We usually end up playing stuff live quite a bit before we ever bring it into a studio. So it's kind of, the question is more like, once the record's out, will we ever play that again?
Okay.
Which a lot of times in the past, we'll pick certain songs, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think now it's like the record that's about to come out, we'll probably never play that stuff again. Maybe
yeah, or maybe the one we played the last song on the record we played the last time we got together. Maybe we'll keep that one for another year, but I don't know. We like to just keep it moving most of the time.
Yeah.
You guys keep it fresh for yourselves.
Yeah, I find it easier to bring a decent part of myself to a performance when it's new and it's fresh and I'm like involved in it. Sometimes when you're playing stuff that's really old, it can feel more like you're phoning it in, or it's just like, I don't know, not potent.
Yeah, I think as far as the improvisational aspect of it goes, it's like when we play new material, we play it live before recording it, and there's an openness for new things to happen while we're playing it live, and there's a space. So we're keeping to a script for a song, but it's kind of like anything could happen, and then that could, when it's recorded, you're essentially like sampling that moment. And so up until the point that we record it, that song is entirely fluid and open to change. And it could be subtle nuances with each one of our individual parts or sounds, or it could be a big change. And but until it's recorded, we can do whatever we want with it. And then we record it and never play it again.
Yeah, I guess like the recording, we kind of treat the recording as like the final version of a piece.
So like after shows, would people that come up to you guys and be like, hey, I wanted to hear the new record front to back, or you didn't play this exactly the same way? It's on the recording.
You'd be surprised. I don't know if people are that interested, to be honest with you.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah, sometimes people will ask about older stuff, but it's pretty rare. I think if people have seen us before or know a little bit about the band ahead of time, maybe they know that we don't stick to older stuff too much.
Fair enough. So
I think I've seen some comments online though, where people have seen that we're going to play or do a tour, and they're asking for specifics from old albums, which always kind of shocked me.
Oh.
They're like, oh, is it going to be the lineup with the drums, or just little things like that. It's like, oh, people are maybe more invested in the old recordings than we are.
So, I mean, that must be cool that there are some fans out there that want like the hits, the classic White Sun shit.
Yeah.
So over the years, you guys have released with a bunch of labels like Ugg Explode, Load, the Flenser, and then new stuff with Decoherence and Flag Day. And so like Ugg Explode and Load are really not around anymore. So like I think with Ugg Explode, Weasel's just focusing on his own material basically. But I'm sure you guys have seen that like the record label landscape and just like the infrastructure for weird music is constantly shifting. So like, how do you guys adapt to that?
It's not fun. Yeah, whenever we start to talk about a recording session or we feel like we're ready to put out a release, trying to find someone to help us put out records is definitely the worst part of being a band, I would say. I know that there are folks out there who would say, self-release your stuff, and maybe we're getting closer to being ready for that, but in the past, we've just wanted to focus on making the music and doing the artwork and stuff, and we also haven't had, $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 to put into, because we make enough money when we play to cover our recording sessions and our travel costs, but we've never made like a profit as a band. We just put all our money back into our operating costs. And there has never been so much room for us to actually have the budget to press a record ourselves.
Yeah, and then promote it. And just to give you a sense, like it's taken 2 years, and most of that, like the recording process for the songs that are on this new record was 2 days.
Yeah.
And now it's finally getting released, and that process, just for you guys to find somebody to put it out.
Yeah. It's I don't begrudge anyone who is hesitant about spending money to release weird music. It's not a profit-making venture. it would be nice if, it might be nice if more people bought records now. I mean, I think people do buy records, but sometimes I'm try to play a little, I don't know, a little game in my head where it's like, if this record came out in like 1990, how many copies would we sell? I don't know. It is hard to find ways to put out music. And at a certain point, it's just like, you can't spend too much time thinking about it. It's out of your control,
Tell me about the Decoherence label, because prior to reading about you guys working with them, I had not heard of that label before.
It's basically pretty much a one-man operation by this guy, MP Lockwood, who is someone that we've known from the New York music scene for quite a while. And he plays music himself, and he started to put out releases a little while ago. He's been at it for a few years, and he's put out records and tapes by some friends of ours. He did a Mincemeat or 10-speed record, which is an old friend of ours from Philadelphia. And I think he did a Formalog. Did he do a Formalog record, Rick, too?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and now more recently, he's been doing some releases by some folks in Brooklyn who are a bit younger than ourselves, but are doing kind of freaky rock-based music. There's a band called Shimmer and another one called Dog, who are both pretty cool.
He's putting out a Dog record?
Yeah, or maybe not a record, a release of some kind.
Right. I think it's pretty. I mean, I've known MP since before I ever moved to New York. So that would have been like early on, just starting to play with you and Dana and stuff, and kind of going to shows in Deaf by Audio. And it's pretty cool that 12 years after the fact, he's putting out a record of ours.
Yeah, he's a great guy, and he is like a true believer in outsider music. So he's a good person to help us.
When people ask you like what you do, and let's say it comes out that you do music, like what do you tell them it sounds like? And I guess I'm referring to if you're talking to someone who's not a musician and definitely not familiar with like weird outside shit.
You go first, Rick.
Yeah, so I'm like, our chickens are going crazy, so I was a little distracted for a second. I try to, in Montana anyway, like living here, I kind of try to avoid the question sometimes, because it's unpacking like to people what noise is. It's like, I don't know, it's almost like you're talking to somebody like 15 years ago here. Yeah, it's hard to describe what White Suns is. And so I usually start with like experimental and test the waters that way and see what people maybe know about, and then can take it further. And more recently, I feel like I'm just like, yeah, I've been in this band for 15 years. You'd hate it. What? It's like, it's not like, or telling people I like play guitar. I have to explain to them like, I don't really play guitar, like I'm not going to like bust out a James Taylor cover around a campfire. Like that's not how I play the guitar, so to speak.
Like you're not going to play at the corner bar on a Friday night?
Yeah, there's actually a bar called the Corner Bar. So yeah, there's a lot of explaining, and I feel like I have to tailor it for each individual person that I talk to here. And, some people listen to it and they're like, this is cool, or I've never heard anything like this. And some people are like, weird. Or I've also had people that I show the music to hear and they're like, man, you got a dark side, huh? So yeah, it's a new and different journey every time I tell people that I played music, basically.
Like with that being said, have you met any White Suns fans in Montana so far?
Yeah, I mean,
nice.
Maybe not prior to meeting them, but I used to work at a restaurant and with these younger kids, and I gave them records and they fucking love it, But I kind of knew they would after talking to them and like listening to different music. And somebody's like, oh, you ever listen to Lightning Bolt? I'm like, okay, like you might be into this.
That's cool. Yeah, you could be cultivating like the new Montana noise scene. So that's awesome.
Yeah, and we do. I mean, there's a small contingent of people that are into noise here, I will say, that are pretty excited by it, and a couple people maybe knew about Sons via, Load Records or whatever. So it's there. It's exciting.
Yeah, for me, it definitely depends on who the person is, like Rick was saying. Sometimes if the person is over the age of, say, like 50, they'll ask me, do you play your own music? Which I always like hearing that question, because it's definitely a question from like an earlier time.
Yeah.
And I tell them, yes, we play originals. And they're like, oh, that's so nice. But yeah, I usually, if it's like someone who is just making conversation, it's like your average person you meet on the street who I've never met before, I just tell them it's like loud and aggressive, and that usually kind of stops the conversation.
Have you played your music for your parents? And if yes, what do they think?
I've never played any recordings for them, but I did right before Rick left. Actually, Rick and Dana were going to leave New York the same summer many years ago to go do their separate ways for a while, and we were going to play one last show, and we were playing with Glenn Branca, which was also cool. He had a small small orchestra type setup that night. But I knew it was going to be our last show with like a rock setup or with we weren't sure like what the band was going to be like, going down the line at that point. So I called my parents and I was like, well, we're playing this show. It's a pretty cool one. And it might be your last chance to see us like in this format, and your only chance, because they'd never seen me play music ever before. And they came and they watched us, and I think they were, I think they weren't sure what to say. And my mom was just like, you guys were trying really hard.
That's funny.
I think they just hadn't probably never seen me scream before, and probably didn't expect that I was going to like push some people in the audience. And I don't know, I always thought we're pretty physical performers, especially back during that time. And I think they had no expectation that would be the case.
That's so cool.
And we've never talked about it since.
Like the new family secret.
Yeah. I think, they also know that it's hard for me to explain to people what I do. So I don't even think they bother to tell people like that their son is a musician or whatever.
Right. They like save themselves the trouble.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
What are some of like the weirder, I guess, methodologies you guys have tried out in White Suns? Like, for example, you ever like put a contact mic on the toilet and like shit into it or something like that?
Rick, you ever done that?
I put contact mics on almost everything, and I've never put one on a toilet, but maybe after this interview. Methodology though, I mean, we messed around with some graphic scores for a while there.
Oh yeah.
More focused methodology, I would say we all participated in. And then we also, a few years ago, before when we were just going to get back together and tour for the first time in a long time, we all collected a bunch of field recordings and used those.
Oh, yeah, right.
And
we'll try anything.
Yeah, I don't consider that stuff that weird though, I would say.
I guess it's weird compared to maybe like our first record, which is like very much a rock record.
But when I think about that first record, there's a lot of stuff that I used, like tape oriented and pieces of gear that wound up getting deleted from the setup over the years. Right. Like, I don't know, almost like that was weirder.
Yeah, there were probably more contact mics early on. Yeah,
we were trying so many different things out in those early days. So
it's cool that like it seems the White Suns aesthetic is pretty much whatever you guys want. Like there's no hard or fast rule about we can or can't do this, because then it would be considered like an outside project. That must be very liberating.
Yeah, that's not, I think one of the reasons I think we still enjoy playing together is that there's just a lot of unspoken agreement all the time. We just work well together. We don't get along every single second of every single day per se, but when we're actually making the music together, it just is really easy. I think each one of us kind of has our own aesthetic that we bring to the table, and we all kind of, without speaking, like understand each other's vibes, and we come together and we each add our own kind of thing to it. I don't know how to explain it, but it just works.
Yeah. It seems like you guys really have like a pseudo psychic link, having known each other from high school.
Yeah, that probably helps.
Yeah, I think so too. Because I mean, there's three separate mouths and three separate ideas and three separate individuals. But when we play as White Suns, that's like the fourth entity of all of us. And so I feel like Dana has his own solo music, and you play in other bands, and I have my ideas about what I want music that I make to sound like. But when we come together, it's White Suns. And the cool thing about that though is that it's different every time. It's there's no like we're not like striving towards a particular aesthetic. It's just that whatever it's going to be when we
Yeah, and I think, in the long run, we usually agree on what types of sounds we like. Like, I think the palette that we each use, we like what each other is doing most of the time. And if also we're pretty easygoing, like, if one of us asks someone else to change their part or play it shorter or longer, none of us gets too salty about that usually. That helps, I think, too. I've played in other bands where people can get like very touchy about about critiques or constructive criticism of a part or whatever. But with White Suns, I feel like no part is so sacred that it can't be changed and morphed. And at the end of the day, we're usually all happy with the finished product. So I think that helps too, for us to work well together. We're all comfortable like criticizing and taking criticism.
Yeah, I don't think the product is never finished, so to speak, unless everybody's happy with it.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's like usually not the case then that like two of you can outvote someone else, or like Dana, for example.
I don't know if it ever would come to that. I think none of us want to have some kind of protracted grudge about a part, so we usually try to settle any differences like during the writing process. And compromise is always nice, so that works too. I would give that advice to any band.
Yeah, there are only so many bands that could get away with like the top-down dictator approach, like a Captain Beefheart or something like that.
Right.
Even then, like that lineup lasts for like one record, then everyone's like, "Yeah, fuck this guy, I'm out."
Yeah. If there's someone who's like clearly, a genius level creator, then yeah, go for that. But I don't think any of us are geniuses, so we need each other to make it good.
So given that you guys are a fairly agreeable bunch, like when you guys are on tour and picking the music that goes on in the tour van, is it pretty much like your different playlists would line up with each other? Or is there a case when someone plays something you're like, I can't believe like you listen to this. I'm just gonna listen to something else in my headphones.
Actually, it's funny, like most of the touring we've done, none of us have had like smartphones or Spotify or any like that kind of stuff. It's mostly like, let's see what's on the radio, or let's maybe not listen to music because we're playing every night and watching 3 or 4 other bands too.
Yeah, usually it's in the past it was maybe we had like a tape deck.
Yeah.
Like, and maybe people would bring along some tapes, or Kevin used to bring books on tape, which I always found pretty pleasant to listen to. Or yeah, we listened to the radio, which winds up being like country.
Yeah, we listen to the radio and just like, laugh our asses off it.
It's a lot of goofing off. It's not a lot of serious listening that ever happens in the band.
Yeah, it's good. I think it's also fun while you're on tour when you have your downtime. You go to the local thrift shop and you're like, all right, I need something for the van. Let's see what we got in here. And you find whatever $2 cassette seems like the weirdest one, and that's your that's your soundtrack for the next 2 days.
So given that you guys are like a true like working DIY band, I imagine when you guys book tour, you like to have as much control over like who you're playing with in each town. So I guess the question is, have you guys ever played with a ska band? Or like, what are some surprising like lineups you guys have encountered? Or like, oh, this kind of doesn't make sense, but let's just see what happens.
Immediate one that comes to mind is the last tour that we did before Dana and I moved away from New York. We played with like a one-man band in Georgia. You remember this, Kevin?
No, which one was this?
In Atlanta. It was a horrible, like that was one of the shows where all like the gear exploded. We couldn't even finish our set. And this guy was like playing drums, looping guitar, and then he pulled out a trombone. And it was like, this doesn't make any goddamn sense.
I do remember that. As I recall, he was the only one who brought anybody out to the show too.
Yeah, there was a good like 3 or 4 people there. They did not care for us, and I don't really remember what happened at that particular show, but it was.
I just remember it was fucking bad. Yeah,
it was a nightmare. Yeah.
And I'm guessing he wasn't playing like George Lewis style, like avant-garde trombone.
No, not at all.
Yeah. We've played with not a ska band, but we have played with like borderline pop punk bands like once or twice. That was pretty weird. I remember, I don't know if you remember this one, Rick, but remember when we played in that bike shop in Wilmington, Delaware? This was like a while ago.
Yeah.
And one of the bands was like some of the kids who worked in the bike shop, and they basically sounded like Rancid or something.
Yeah. I do remember that.
But they, sometimes when you're doing DIY touring, sometimes the folks who are kind enough to open their home or their workplace or their art studio to have a show will want to also play. And these people are often very kind, but don't match up with us in terms of our creative philosophy. That's okay. You can just have a couple beers and have a couple chuckles in the back while they're doing their thing.
Yeah, you couldn't be too picky about it.
That's true. Yeah.
When you were trying to tour the 4-week tour around the US, there's going to be some weirdness. And I mean, El Paso, do you remember that show?
Oh yeah.
That was like a straight up like pop punk band, and they were like a bunch of high school kids that were in the show, and that was super weird.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely part of the fun. We were never under the impression that we were going to be a wild success with our music. So we're not like, it's not a existential crisis if we play with some bands that suck and sound not anything like us once in a while. There are plenty of good shows too.
Yeah, they easily make up for it. The good shows are usually really good, I would say.
Yeah, and I think one of the things about touring at that level is it really gives you an education about what kind of people live in this country. I always liked that about DIY touring.
Yeah, same here, that you're not being carted around in a bus and then hanging out in the green room, then go out and play the set and then go back to the green room and then go back to the bus. Like we're meeting the people and usually staying at their house and maybe getting breakfast with them the next day and looking at people's record collections and books and just really getting a slice of what living in a town is like for a night. So.
Yeah, it's cool. It's a little bit of a kind of utopian economy thing when you're on tour like that.
Yeah, I do miss that about touring. You get to go places that normally you would never go, and you're like, oh, this is what it's like here. This is awesome.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think if more people, I don't know if I'm not gonna like die on this hill exactly, but I do think if more people did that, I think people would be nicer in general. If you got around the country and met different folks and you helped each other, get the show organized each night in a different town, it's cool to do that. Definitely makes me less prejudiced about certain parts of the country that might get dumped on regularly. You know what I mean?
I think I'm pretty much out of questions. So, what do you guys have to look forward to in 2021? Like, if things get de-COVIDed, would you guys tour this year?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really nice and inspiring to kind of get together at least once a year and do something. I would love to.
Yeah, I would love to also, but we haven't talked about it because there doesn't seem to be an end in sight, really. It seems like the vaccine is nice to have, but it doesn't seem like there is any kind of live group culture being discussed at all yet. So I don't know.
Yeah,
but it would be nice. I do miss it a lot.
Yeah, we did talk about maybe just trying to get together to record the material that we wrote and played a couple of years ago in Latvia.
Yeah, we wrote a bunch of new stuff that is not on the record coming out at the end of 2019 because we got asked to play this festival in Latvia, and we were like, all right, well, why don't we just make some new stuff? So we got together and did that, and we got back from Latvia, and then it was the end of the year, And then the calendar turned over and COVID happened. So we kind of got stopped in our tracks in terms of our normal procedure, which is a slow one for us. But so I don't know. I would love to get together and record and play a couple shows as soon as we can, really.
Like one thing I worry about, and I've talked about this on a previous episode, is that post-COVID, like people might have to reevaluate how DIY shows happen, because you're basically inviting a bunch of strangers to get sweaty in your basement and people from out of town just like crashing your couch. And so then like the criteria for that, like the social component of it might have to really be reevaluated.
Yeah. Sure. You know, that hadn't occurred to me at all, but I think you're right. Yeah. It used to be just like, you know, your major dangers were like waking up in cat litter or STDs or fleas and stuff, you know? Now it's like a little more deadly. Yeah, that is a scary thought.
I hadn't thought about the STDs or fleas part, but like just mentioning that, I'm like, oh shit, DIY touring back in the day was scary. And I guess you just get like used to weird shit like that.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, they say humans are the most adaptable animal, right? So
that's like a pretty good silver lining to all this. So we shall overcome all sorts of weird biological stuff. Yeah, with that being said, I don't have any other questions for you guys, and I want to be mindful of your time. Thanks so much for chatting with me. Where can people hear the new music?
The internet, I guess. You know, the record, the album is actually going to be a record, and the other release, Modern Preserves, is actually going to be a cassette. I don't know what the ship date for those is exactly, but they both come out on Friday the 15th. And the best way to buy them is probably just to look it up on Bandcamp and find it all there.
I guess final question, like, do you guys put your music on Spotify and the other streaming services?
It's on Spotify.
Yeah, we don't really control that stuff. I'm kind of a low-tech person when it comes to music. But I know that the Flenser is one of the only labels left standing from people who have released our music in the past. Let that be a warning to all record labels. But I think they have our stuff on the major platforms because the Flenser, Jonathan, who runs that label, is really good at keeping up with the times. So I think he does a good job with all that stuff.
Well, Kevin and Rick, thank you so much. Dana of White Suns, thanks for joining me. I'm doing all right.
Yeah, I realized. So your band is Imelda MarCAST, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
A few years ago, you actually played in the basement of the house I'm sitting in right now in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, that was October 2018 with Yohimbe and Kyle Flanagan.
Right. Yes. Okay. Yeah. We had a funny time in the yard after that, if I remember.
Yeah, that was a really cool hang. We had the lawn chairs in the yard, and that hill overlooks like the freeway, and you see the Pittsburgh skyline. It's a really good time.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that you played in White Suns until I think like you went inside to get some beer, and Kyle's like, "Oh yeah, Dana plays in White Suns." I'm like, "Holy shit! I hope I didn't say anything stupid. That's crazy. That's awesome. I love those dudes."
I'm sure by that point in the night, I was too far gone to remember anything he said. But yeah, that's cool. Yeah. I always like it when there are those little coincidences. Or I feel like the longer I drag myself through the music world, the more things like that happen.
Yeah, thanks for having us in your basement. That was a very sweaty, humid time. It's a very short basement, and I'm not a tall dude, but like at times, like even I felt claustrophobic. It was really cool. I had a blast playing there.
Cool. Yeah, I'm glad it worked out.
So I talked to Kevin and Rick earlier. So now we get to circle back with you. So you guys all met in high school in rural Connecticut. Like about what year was this?
For me, I got to know Kevin through Rick's social group, who I ended up befriending around 2003, 2004. Prior to that, I had been friends with people, it's kind of that transitional period halfway through high school. You're starting to like, being able to drive is on the horizon. You're kind of like, gaining some more autonomy. And I realized a lot of the people I was friends with at the time, I just didn't, as we had gotten older, I didn't end up sharing a lot of their interests. And yeah, Rick's group was like kind of one that they were a bit older than me, and I thought were cool, and kind of like forced my way into getting to know them. Anyway, that's a long version.
That's all good. So when you three met, did you more or less start White Suns right away, or did it take some time just like getting to know them, hanging out?
Yeah, it took some time. I wasn't like a much of a musician at the time before I started hanging out with them. They were all interested in music, and I kind of felt that pull, but hadn't played an instrument before. So yeah, there was definitely some growing periods of getting into various styles and kinds of music, and then eventually happening upon some of the more distant stuff, the noise world that especially was going on in around like Providence back then was a big influence. And at some point, I guess there's this feeling like, well, let's try doing this ourselves.
So like early on, what bands and artists were you guys bonding over? Like who did you really look up to early on?
For me, some of the iconic bands very early on were things coming out of good records. So definitely Hair Police was one I was into a lot. Lightning Bolt, of course. Sightings, Fat Worm of Air were all bands that I thought were doing strange, different sounding stuff, but with rock instrumentation, which is kind of, was one of the things that motivated our own approach. X Models, I think we listened to a lot of back then, and Black Eyes too.
Is it fair to say that in White Suns, you're known as the guy with the technology for the noise stuff? For example, what I mean is, I know there's a picture on your Facebook and there's a modest modular setup, and I was asking Kevin and Rick about that, and they're like, oh yeah, that's all Dana. So are you the weird tech noise person in White Suns?
I think like Rick and I share that title, because sort of nominally a guitar player, but he's always had these like weird auxiliary percussion setups where, he usually has more of like a setup that involves things that he's like hijacked, like, I don't know, a reverb tank that he took out of an amp and is running through pedals, or he had at one point some weird kind of non-percussion instrument, like a sundial that he took out of his mom's garden that he like put some contact mics on. So he's been doing a lot of that stuff too. But yeah, he and I both sort of had this approach of just like, I would put contact mics on my drums and run that through a whole rig early on. But at the same time, I was doing my own kind of noise stuff. And as that developed and I started playing more electronic music, it was like, well, why don't we integrate that with what we've already been doing with the band?
So like over the past, let's say like 10, 15 years, a lot of, like modular synthesis getting popular, and then, with computers, there's more like processing power available for a lower price point. So given that like all of this technology changes, like what's your relationship with changing technology and like in terms of thinking how it could be used to generate sound in White Suns?
Yeah, that's a really deep question, and I'm not sure like how extensively I've thought about that in terms of like all of the options that are available with technology that's out there. Usually my reasons for working with one thing rather than another are kind of arbitrary and just based on, for example, the fact that I initially came to this stuff through fucking around with effects pedals and things. So I had a feel for analog electronics. I used to do some circuit bending and building little circuits and things of my own. So I always liked the feel of the analog stuff. And that's, I think, why I ended up opting for fucking around with synthesizers and the modular stuff as well. So yeah, and the fact that I spent most of my time looking at a computer for like job related things and, most other aspects of my like media consumption and things like that these days, I wasn't super excited to do more computer things. Yeah, I don't even like editing music on a computer because of all the pointing and clicking and dragging just feels so kind of like tedious and anal to me. So yeah, my reasons for going in that direction, I think, are not necessarily the best ones from the perspective of like what you can do with the technology. But yeah, I don't think we've like, at least at this point, we're not like really thinking of it as a band that's constrained by any particular means of making sounds. So yeah, if there was a desire to take advantage of, yeah, more in that realm, it's always like on the table. But at the end of the day, it's there's been an emphasis in the band and in my own like ways of making music myself on being able to do it live. Everything that we record is stuff that was designed and playable for like the live environment. So yeah, if I have trouble seeing the band go too far down the kind of like prepared track kind of direction.
Do you have
That's kind of a roundabout.
Oh no, that's cool. So like I have a modular setup myself, and part of the appeal for me is like you said that like my day job is I stare at a screen all day. So like having to do that with music would be soul crushing. So the idea that you're just patching cables and like knob twiddling is really appealing. So I guess one question is like, have you brought the modular setup into the live set? And if so, like, have you run into like any difficulties with that? Just like tech issues or like, you know, if you're playing like a rowdy basement and like there's assholes spilling beer everywhere and you're like, dude, you gotta keep the beer away from the modular case, bro.
Yeah, that's that kind of thing. Yeah, there's always going to be like some built-in limitations. I've tried to find a way to set it up for the band so that it has a kind of way of working intuitively as an instrument. But that also means like, you know, doing things that might come really easily on the drum, transitioning from one rhythm or beat to another one transitioning from doing something on the drums to some kind of like sound coming out of the electronics can, I find, be like require a lot more planning and forethought on the modular, because you can like set it up to do one thing pretty well, but dramatically changing a bunch of settings is a pain in the ass. So I've definitely run into things like that, where I either have to like plan ahead and start changing things on one channel while I'm still like playing another one, or kind of program certain changes. That's definitely, there's a learning curve with that. And there are ways that just being able to smack an instrument and have it make a sound, I think, that are like, bring lots of advantages.
Yeah, like you hit a cymbal, it's more or less the same sound every time, but with modular, even if you patch it, it's not necessarily going to make the same sound. Like if you just like adjust one knob, it changes like that whole ecosystem.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing that drives me a little crazy about working in that way is, I have to end up, and I was already doing this in the band with the pedal setups and things, especially like because we'd use like feedback loops that have a very specific sound at specific settings. There's, and like the stuff for the album Psychic Drift, I was using like various circuit bench shit that like slowly broke more as we'd tour and as I'd like play it. So it'd end up like just making new and different sounds and like, working differently as time went on. So that shit's always kind of driven me crazy about like having to tweak the settings and get them exactly right. But that comes with the territory, I guess.
I imagine for you, like it would be easy to just sample what you guys put on the record, but then you'd lose that live element by just like pressing play on a sampler, right? Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, there's something about the live experience of music that's important to me. I know it's not necessarily part of how a lot of people experience music or listen to it these days, but you know, it's at one point in time, this was all stuff that people had to gather around to hear and see somebody actually perform. And I still am very attached to that kind of setting. And I don't think I would enjoy playing live if that weren't a part of it for me. I like actually, yeah, feeling like I'm directing the music in the moment while it's happening.
So I have to ask.
Maybe another just what's up?
Oh no, sorry. There's a little bit of delay, so I think I'm just trying to accommodate to like that lag. So I have to ask, what are some of the modules in your case?
Oh, we're going in that direction.
Yeah, I have to.
Maybe I'll just mention one. Yeah, I'll just mention one that I really
Sure.
like. The Reflex Live Loop by this woman in Canada who I think she makes them all, designs them all herself, and loads on like a fuck ton of features, but onto this thing that's basically designed to just like, it's a live sampler, so you can just play something, load it in, then cut it up however you want. You can like choose different like marks, like sort of index points, and then jump around between them and apply certain other kinds of transformations to the sound. So it ends up being like a great sort of live music tool that at the same time allows you to like take a sample and fuck it up and chop it up. And doing that with drums has been a fun way of getting the kind of like freeform chaotic playing that I was doing physically, yeah, beforehand.
Awesome. Yeah, I hear good things about that module.
Yeah, it's worth playing with. For me at this point, it's like, all right, I have to sell things to get new things because they're also fucking expensive.
Oh yeah, it's a fun hole of money that you just, yeah, it's a money pit, but like it's a very fun money pit. I suppose it's better than like drugs, or productive perhaps. So having talked to Kevin and Rick earlier, and they mentioned that when you guys decide to get together and make a new album, that there isn't much discussion about like what the direction should be. It's like more of an organic process where you'll get together in the room and you'll then kind of curate what you like based on improvisation. And then also that like when you guys play live, like it's not one of your concerns to like recreate the album. So to me, like in that sense, White Suns has this it's like this free flowing organism. So like, given that, do you think White Suns has like a final end goal to the project? Does that make sense?
I mean, in a way, based on like that, just like those elements of how we end up getting together and writing stuff, it's kind of hard to conceive of what the end goal would be. And it's not really something that is planned a great deal prior to our getting together and actually crafting the music. For me, it's always just been sort of this question of like, all right, well, what do we do next? Not with a specific like final goal in mind, but more of a push to reinvent the band in some way, or yeah, come up with some sort of novel version of what is the kind of working language that we have. There's always been this kind of aversion to being too repetitive and just kind of going over the same ideas over and over with our band, but at the same time preserving a sort of way of thinking about writing music and kind of the sorts of sounds that we end up being good at making together. That I don't know, it's been just sticking with those sort of like very general ways of working together has ended up being pretty progressive, I guess you could say, in that we can always find a new way to sort of reinvent the band and generate new sort of material that doesn't feel like I was saying, doesn't sort of fall into those traps. But I don't know if there's like there's an end goal directing that so much as kind of a style of playing that has always, at least for me, has been very attractive and that I've seen. And maybe it was more common. I don't know if it was ever common, but again, like Fat Worm of Air is like a reference point for me, because they were a band that, and I didn't really appreciate this until I saw them live, they did this really amazing job of having a sort of tightly structured compositional approach that at the same time sounded totally chaotic. So you'd go see the band and you'd be like, what the fuck am I listening to? These people don't even like seem to be hearing each other while they're playing. And then you'd go see them again and you'd hear the same songs and it would be like, oh, okay, there's like, and I think that sort of realization was one that really excited me about their kind of music. And as a performer is always one that's appealing because it allows you to yourself kind of not have to be so completely locked into a sort of note for note composition. You can sort of explore a little while still having a kind of path. So that, yeah, there's something about that general arrangement that I think is always there in the band, despite the ways that we kind of mess with the other elements. Yeah, sorry, it took me a moment to realize that.
Yeah, I think that sort of looseness in terms of a live context, it makes it more expressive to the performer, and then that translates directly to the audience experience, or they're experiencing like this new event as opposed to just a recreation of like a recorded product. I think that's part of the appeal of that.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a fan of, although I'm not like the deepest like listener to it. I am a fan of the kind of like improv music world. I'll put on some shows and have still try to attend shows where of people who kind of fall into that realm. And it's a style of listening and performing that is one that makes for a great experience for me. I guess if you love a band and you know how the songs go, it can be very fun to see them do those things and kind of anticipate every part. But the journey is so different going to see, somebody at the Stone, or at least back when the Stone was alive. Yeah, and not knowing what was going to happen next.
It's like across the lifespan of White Suns, you guys have worked with a lot of different labels like Explode, Load, The Flenser. And basically, I guess my question is, how much of a pain in the ass is it to find a label to work with? Because, like Explode is mainly, like Weasel's mainly putting out his own music, and then Load, like they stopped like a while back. So like, I guess like the label infrastructure for like weird music, it's constantly changing because people, for whatever reason, they shut the doors,
Oh, it's a huge pain in the ass, I think. I mean, there's sort of, a lot of these things depend in some ways on social relationships, and it's like how aware people are of various names and figures, but also just the agendas that everybody has for their label, which are theirs to determine and might not, whatever random shit you want to throw at them. Yeah, it might not meet that. There's also just so many people making music, and a lot of very talented people that are making stuff that, in one way or another is kind of like out there and experimental and weird, or I think it always feels like a total crapshoot when we're seeing if anybody would be interested in what we're doing.
Yeah, so just in closing, where can people find the new White Suns music?
If you go to our Bandcamp, you'll find links to both the new albums. That's Google White Suns Bandcamp. Or you can go to the record labels. Decoherence is one. Flag Day Recordings is the other.
I actually thought of a final question. Would you guys ever do like a live stream show, considering that you're in 3 different locations? Is there any appeal in that for you guys, or does that just seem silly?
We actually were invited to do one over the summer. I mean, having messed around with these live stream things a bit, it seems like a lot of people do pre-recorded sets anyway. And so what we decided to do one ourselves, but what that involved was actually the first time that we like separately like multi-tracked, like wrote parts and passed things around, and then we made like a little video to go along with it. If we ever end up doing a live stream type thing again, it'll probably have to be in that form.
Were you guys happy with that final
product? Yeah, that's out there. Yeah, it's cool. It's different. It was all like instrumental, and but it was it was a new process for us, sort of taking certain sort of starting points and then just like adding shit on. It's not always how we do it. So yeah, it was worth doing. There's a video on YouTube called Temporal Shock.
Awesome. Well, Dana, thank you so much for your time. I've had a pleasure talking to you, and I can't wait to hear the new shit, man.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, thanks so much for doing this. And sorry